Spot.
All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, today is our social episode, and we have to weigh in on the New York mayoral candidate because everybody is, and hey, it's going to make good clickbait in the title. But also, if you live in our in our area where it's not as big a problem, it's going to be a lot of reasons to be vigilant on
Hmm.
not letting it sneak in to the system. And gosh, let's get our popcorn out and watch the show in New York.
Yeah, well, it also because the other reason I wanted to talk about this is it kind of coalesces a number of things we have been talking about the past several social episodes, partly spinning off of comments from Isomorphic that he has made just in general and from his own perspective, living in a different kind of culture and a different kind of politics in Russia. And what is culture and why does it matter? And what happens when you import incompatible culture from other places and then expect it to all work out?
Hmm.
Yeah, the UK right now is the glaring example because one, what is going on there is so horrific when we talk about brooming things. Um, but also for not just for us in Americas because they are our cousins, as was it everything's attributed to Churchill, but I think this one he actually said is a, a people separated by a common language. Um, it's so similar but so different.
Hmm.
But also as kind of the originators of what we think of when we think of the Enlightenment. Um, that is primarily you think about people like John Locke, Adam Smith. These were British. Well, I say British. I don't know if we have anyone from Scotland who happens to listen. I should point out that actually most of them were Scottish, and so the English call them British, so they don't have to point out they were actually Scottish thinkers. But I digress. So even from a Western European standpoint, they are kind of the originators of what became what we generically refer to as Western liberal democracy. And so when you see how far they have fallen and how bad it has become and how resistant to fixing it their leadership and a good part of their society is, that's pretty damn terrifying. And it is a canary in the coal mine to anyone else to say, boy, howdy, how do we not get there?
Yeah, and after we talk Mamdani in particular, there's actually a concept that we might explore, and I'm going to frame this in that there is broad culture, and then there is that can, and then it kind of can narrow down all the way down to the individual, right? And I'm going to analogize this to the old saying, "I'm free." In the United States, we say this: "You're free to swing your fist." But that freedom ends when it makes contact to somebody else's face, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the freedom to swing your fist ends when you make contact to somebody else's face. The culture within your household can be what you grew up with, what the what you brought from where you came from. But when that bleeds out into society and affects politics, then it becomes something different. Now your fist is hitting people's faces. Inside your internal family, inside your internal thoughts, how you practice your religion, all of those things, that's on you, bro. But when you start affecting the entire society or even your neighbor, then it becomes something that is a problem. And that's, I think, something we can probably explore further.
Yeah, well, you had pulled up Mamdani is the mayoral candidate who last I saw, I think he's leading in the polls. You had pulled up his background, and I think that's where you wanted to start because it is
Yeah, I thought that'd be a
interesting.
useful place to start. This is actually from his congressional page when he was his assembly page, which is his
Yeah.
current position. Let me move this so I can actually, or do you want to read it?
No, you go ahead.
Zohran Mamdani was born and raised in Kampala, Uganda, moved to New York City with his family at age 7. A graduate of New York City public school system, highlight that real quick. He
Hmm.
attended the Bronx High School of Science, the Bronx High School of Science. He contradicted himself right there, but we digress. And received a bachelor's degree in African studies from Bowdoin College. A few years later, in 2018, he became a naturalized citizen of the United States. Okay, so first of all, if you go to a school of science, you're not just going to the regular public school. Let's go ahead and just put that one out there. Now, what he doesn't put on this page, we can get from his wiki. No, not from his wiki, from PBS. Hold on. Bar, get out of the way. All right. From PBS, his mother was a famous filmmaker, and they were loaded. So he even self-described himself as privileged growing up, and but he, from that perspective, he can see the injustice that's going on, which is the opposite of what you get when you're a white dude and you're trying to talk to somebody who calls himself oppressed. But again, we digress. So let's go back to his page. He represents the 36th district.
Well, hold on a second. Let me go because I've got using DuckDuckGo and their AI generation, which comes from Wikipedia and the BBC. His mom, um, it says renowned filmmaker and Harvard graduate.
His mother, yes.
Hmm. Which I think is also important and interesting is not only wealthy but elitist in their credentials and undoubtedly from when you hear him talk elitist in their mentality.
Which actually begs a question, right? Because one of the big complaints, if you're talking about when we're talking about privilege and coming from wealthy families and everything, in the argument of why we don't accept all these white males and everything into these Ivy Leagues, they bring up legacy students because you have a leg up. Why didn't Mamdani go to Harvard? What's the story behind that?
Mm.
Did he just not want to?
Well,
Or did he not have the chops for it? Or was he too interested in his so-called rap career and music career?
not just Harvard, but then his father,
Mhm.
it says influential academic and political scientist, professor at Columbia.
Yeah.
So double Ivy Leaguer family there.
And so why didn't he go to one of those
Hmm.
universities? That is actually a very legit question to ask. If you are legacy in two of the biggest Ivy League universities in the United States and you graduated from this prestigious high school, why did you not at least do what you wanted to do instead of following in their footsteps at one of those major universities? Especially if you have big ambitions. Because
Hmm.
he started all of these uh what would you call them? Like he started the cricket league, but he also started the a bunch of associations in all of these places he went. If you have that kind of ambition, why are you not getting that Ivy League education?
I love the conclusion here on the AI generated answer of which all I searched was Mamdani background, and
Hmm.
this is what it came up with. And I love the last sentence. Summation is Mamdani's background reflects a blend of cultural heritage and a commitment to social justice, shaping his political ambitions and community engagement. So there's no bias there at all. Um, th
One of the things that people do say, especially on the right, the pundits, they say he's one of these uh, Democrat socialists that, like a Bernie Sanders, that has never had a real job in their entire life.
mhm.
Apparently, he was working though. He did have a job before he became a politician. He was a hold on.
Is this the housing counselor?
Yes. Yes, he
Yeah.
was he was a low-income housing counselor. Uh,
Foreclosure prevention housing counselor assisting low income homeowners in Queens. It doesn't tell me here in the summary, it doesn't tell me where that was, like who he worked for, because I assumed that would be a government position. Was it not? Was he working for,
It,
if not government, I would assume that would be an NGO, which from the USAID revelations, yeah, those are basically just government positions. There's just a lot of circuitous way the money gets there.
let's see. I thought that one was in his own bio. It must have been PBS. Hold on.
But the
Okay,
reason,
after spending every day negotiating with banks that valued profits over people, he came to face with the reality of the housing crisis. So he worked for. Oh, it never says who he worked for.
curious,
Yeah.
curious. Anyway, it, the reason I wanted to bring this up, um, isn't just the generic immigrant bad that you're going to get labeled with if you bring up this background, because I want to contrast him with someone. And this gets to, I'd mentioned some comments Isomorphic had made, and we've kind of talked around this, but I want to talk about it more directly. Is I've talked about race and ethnicity and how that is a relatively new concept, because for most of human history, it was your tribe or your nation. And that was essentially synonymous with what we would call race was. That, so for instance, um, nowadays in our warped, it really is a warped and fallacious way of looking at things, is someone from the outside looking in would look at, say, us and Isomorphic, who's lives in Russia, and say, well, y'all have similar skin tones, so y'all are the same ethnicity.
Hmm.
Hold on. No. Numerous people have, Konstantin Kisin talks about this when he talks about why the West can't understand Putin and Russia. And he points out, because we have become so warped in our thinking, we're the racists, because we just look at the skin tone and think, oh, they're like us. It's like, no, just because Russians share the same skin tone doesn't mean Slavic people are European people. They
Hmm.
come from a very different history, and that has resulted in a very different culture. And we don't take that into account. And so it's not just where he comes from, it's the ideology that he brought with him.
I think we do take into account because it's the one area of the world that we force them to go through the immigration process and make sure that they're actually trying to escape the culture instead of trying to bring the culture.
Well, in
And
that specific example, yes.
yeah.
Yeah, annoyingly, we don't do that elsewhere. We are more rigid when it comes to certain kinds of immigration, and in other places where the cultural difference is much more stark, much more antithetical to American culture. We're like, yeah, come
which
on
is
in.
which is part of the inherent racism, which that's where the progressives get it right and but so wrong. There's so many times where they like identify a problem right, but then they completely whiff on the intention or the
Yeah.
anything else around
Eh,
it. And this is one where, yeah, it is actually racist because we automatically assume if they're black or brown or something that they're a refugee. We automatically assume.
mm.
We assume that they're coming out of trying to escape something bad. Whereas we have places like, say, go back to the 1980s, if someone was trying to come over from the Soviet Union, well, they're trying to escape something really bad, but because of their skin tone, it was like, oh, well, you know what? You have to go through this process. This process, we've got to make sure we got to make sure you're not an agent, right? Coming in, all of these things, because that was a great fear back then. People trying to get to us from the Soviet Union being agents of the Soviet Union, right?
Well, you have actually segued me into one of the things I really wanted to talk about. Um, which is the way um, America subsidizes the rest of the world, and that's a big part of what Trump's trade policy is. But there is also a major element of that within our broken immigration system. And I have long, before this became a big issue, but as a political nerd, I have long said, hold on, wait a second. I hate even the talking point from the right is, oh, these people are hardworking, you know, and they're going to have our values. Well, no, I don't care if you're hardworking and you want to come here to make a better life. All right. So as an example, I thought of, you know, um, I've been to Japan. If I showed up there and I'm going to stay, well, why do you want to live in Japan? Because I like anime and Godzilla movies. Okay. Go to Korea, same thing. Why do you want to stay in Korea? The women here are really freaking hot. If I went to visit Isomorphic and said, you know what, I'm gonna stay here. Why do you want to live in Russia? I like vodka. Probably a little too much. Okay, the correct answer, the answer you would get from all of those places that actually have immigration laws and enforce them and don't lose their ever loving minds when they do enforce them is okay, enjoy your stay and have a nice flight home because that is not any kind of reason to live here. We don't do that. I don't care if you're coming here to work hard and make a better life. No, I want you to come here because you want to be American.
Hmm.
And so this is the contrast I wanted to make with Mamdani, who is a person of he was born in Uganda, but his parents uh,
We're
were
products of the United
of
States. Yes.
no Indian. His
But
parents were
products of
Indian.
our system. Yes, you're
He
you're
is
correct. Yeah, but he also proudly says the first South Asian to have held an assembly seat and everything.
no no
No,
no
of
right.
course they're going to use every bit of his
But
background to.
the oh, you're just racist because he is a brown person. Okay, well let me contrast that with someone who's even more brown, you racist who only look at skin tone. Dinesh D'Souza. Throw out what you think about his politics and his ideology. That is someone who genuinely, and you can tell by his work, by the documentaries he has made, the books that he has written. This is someone who came to America because he wanted to be American.
Mhm.
And you can tell that in his work product that he loves this country. Even when he criticizes our policies, he does it from a perspective of America and American tradition are worth upholding. They are worth praising. And when we go astray from that, it's not that we need to do something that what people like Mamdani and the Marxist socialists are freaking go to the speech that should have lost Obama the election was when Michelle gave that. I don't remember where it was. Michelle Obama gave a speech saying Barack knows we have to change our history, change our culture, change our tradition. Oh, hold on a second. Not fix, not return to, not, no, no, we have to change them. That is someone who genuinely does not like America, does not like what it stands for, does not like not just what it is or has become, but wholesale what it's ever been. I don't want you coming here if that's what you think.
I'm going to give a better analogous person, and that's Vivek Ramaswamy, because not only is he have a similar parental background to Mamdani, but he's also not a Christian.
Mm,
D'Souza is. I think
yes.
so.
Yep.
Yes. Yes. So he's also not a Christian. He's also brown, but he took the opposite path and he appreciates America and everything it stands for. And I mean, we got a huge dose of that during the Republican primary. So we have a similar background, but a completely different result.
Mm-hmm. Um, the so much of the immigration debate is about Hispanics because that's just math. It is much easier to get here
Yeah,
if you
we
are
kind of
from
share a
Latin
border.
America. Yeah, we share a very large border, and no thanks to Mexico, who if you go to Mexico, I didn't use that, but there's another one is I love me some Mexican food, not just Tex-Mex, but like authentic Mexican food. So if I went there and said, that's why I want to stay, they'd say, okay, enjoy your stay. Bye. Leave now as soon as your tourist visa is up. They don't they don't put up with illegal immigration at all unless you are transiting to the Southern American border. And this is why I approve of the way Trump is being hard on them. Um, and so that is a big reason so much of the rest of Latin America comes here is because if you are coming to if you are coming from Central or South America to stay in Mexico, you're getting kicked out hard and fast. But if you're coming to transit to our southern border, okay, pass on through. Uh, but uh, Rafael Cruz, Ted Cruz's father, who I love even way more than I I like the senator. Here was someone who fought for Castro. And you would think, oh my gosh, why would you want to come here? Well, because he fought for Castro, he saw what they were. Much like Orwell went and fought in the Spanish Civil War. That is a lot of where 1984 came from, is he saw, oh, this socialist side that I approve of, they are they are every bit as susceptible to totalitarianism as the side I'm fighting against. And that
Hmm.
was in large part what he was warning about in 1984. And so because of that, he said, oh no, this is bad. And so that made him love what America stands for even more.
Mm.
And this is not an isolated incident. You had brought up um, the before we started recording that there's a Minneapolis mayoral candidate
Hmm.
who is a Somali quote unquote refugee, because a refugee actually means something specific. It doesn't mean you are, to use Trump's term from his first term, fleeing a shithole country.
Well, on that note, I think we do need to talk slightly about using words. Refugee can mean many different things because you can have no love for our values and no intention of bringing your values and still be wanted and not in good standing where you're at in some of these places. You know, you go to some of these countries and there's like eight different factions fighting for power. So you could have nothing in common with our values here in the States and still need to flee one of these other countries.
Speaking of, here's another one. This is So there have been a number of these that have been popping up that people have been sharing on X, in large part because of the Minneapolis mayoral candidate kind of shining a light on this because he's so radical. Here you have a state, not even federal, state representative in Maine, because that is where the federal government, when the federal government shipped all of these uh, so-called refugees all over the place during the Biden administration, especially, but it was happening under Obama too. And they shipped them out all over the place to make these enclaves. Uh, I knew about the one in Minnesota. I didn't know there was a large Somali population living in Maine, of all places. And I will just, in her own words, quote, we Somalis living outside of Somalia must always prioritize our country, Somalia, and think of developing our country. This must be done, especially by those Somalis living abroad, such as in the United States.
Yeah, I don't care if you're freaking German or French or Swiss. That's disqualifying.
Mm-hmm. Should be anyway. But this is what I wanted to get at
Now
when I
you could
brought up,
say the Somali communities that are trying to develop in this area that I represent, you could say that.
but she didn't say our community. She
No,
said
no.
our country, and she wasn't
Mhm.
referring to the US. But this is entirely in line with the thinking of cultures from places like this. And I teased this last week and or the week before about the mentality of third world countries and why they stay third world. and it is patronage and punishment. All right. The reason elections, even in places where they actually have elections, the reason it almost always leads to violence is because if your side gains power, you are going to reward your people and you're going to punish your opposition. In fact, those rewards are going to come from plundering your opposition. That's all that's happening here.
Hmm.
They see us, the United States, as opposition, as having gained from their mentality of zero sum thinking, having gained our tremendous wealth unfairly at the expense of others. So it is only fair and fitting that they plunder our resources to give them to their people.
You
And that
notice
is what is happening here.
one of the ironies here is none of these politicians are Native American. So one group of people that could say that,
Yeah,
the one group of people would be like, you got a little bit of a point, but how long do we go? That would be the only argument against it. It's just like, uh,
I don't remember who I saw say this, but I saw someone yesterday or the day before post on X of the greatest thing that could happen for to revive football would be if John Gruden wins his suit against the NFL and then becomes the head coach of the Redskins. Bring back the Redskins name and make John Gruden the head coach, and I will buy a Redskins hat.
well, I mean, we still have the Chiefs. He could go there.
Yeah.
Andy Reid's going to retire at some point. But no, I mean, by that logic, what are we going to, how far are we going to go? Are we going to have reparations to the French because it was a contract under duress because Napoleon started a land war in Asia? I mean, what are we going to do? How far do we go? We can make excuses for everything.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It, and that is why that is why Putin's invasion of Russia so shocked the West is because in their mind, to borrow from Fukuyama, who wrote The End of History, is we had evolved past this. No, we haven't. Do you not pay attention to the world? Like maybe in Western Europe and America and certain parts of Asia that had become more westernized, we had evolved past this, so to speak, but not in the rest of the world. Look at all the something like seven conflicts that Trump has mediated. How many of you had heard that this was going on, that Azerbaijan and Armenia were fighting, that oh gosh, who is it now that I saw? Colombia and Bolivia are acting like they're about to go at each other again, because this always happens when you have an unpopular ruler in a crappy country. He's like, shoot, how do I get popularity? Don't Our neighbors suck, we should attack them. The long arc of human history is not changed all that much, but
Hmm.
we are so myopic because we have been born into such comfort.
Yeah, when and you see that with I'm trying to think of the word to describe these people, but they're on the Trump side right now, but they're not critically thinking about this whole cartel thing. They're saying we just need to go in there and blast them all to hell, no matter what the Mexican president says. And I'm like, that's exactly the same thing as you just talked about with Colombia and Bolivia, because that would be an invasion, even if we're targeting the cartels. We were in cooperation with the Panamanian government when we went into Panama. You know, say what you will about those incursions, at least we were in cooperation with the local government.
Mm-hmm.
What's her name in Mexico is not cooperating right now.
Mm-hmm.
And realistically, if we want to say it unofficially, allegedly, the cartel is practically the government there.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, are you declaring war on Mexico? But they're just like, go in there, I don't care. It's like we. Yeah, just relax for a second. There's a right and wrong way to do this.
Go in there if you have to, if you have no other. We we have done this before, and I made this point to replying to someone on X is um to the president of Mexico's point. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
Mhm.
Pakistan did this for decades, for a decade. Pakistan knew that every time we would whoop the Taliban's butt, they would retreat over the border into Pakistan. And they would basically in the off season when the weather sucked, they would rebuild, retrain, recruit there in Pakistan, and then in the next fighting season they would come back into Afghanistan, and our troops there would have to fight them all over again. Well, we knew this was going on, and we tried to put diplomatic pressure on them, but we never crossed over into Pakistan, even when we knew where these things were happening, because it wasn't worth it to violate Pakistan's autonomy for that. However, when we found out that a particular important someone was taking refuge in Pakistan and we knew exactly where he was, we said, all right, we know we can't cooperate with them. We know we can't tell them about this operation. We're going in secretly and we're going to take the guy out because we have to, and because it is worth violating their, it is worth pissing them off
Mhm.
to do this.
Yeah, and people go, "Well, y'all are just talking out your ass. Why would Pakistan let that happen?" Because they're solving a problem for Pakistan. Just like well, I won't analogize it to something in the animal kingdom, so I don't get blamed for being, whatever. But uh, they're solving the young male problem in Pakistan when they do that because the recruiting brochure for the Taliban was targeting young male, not firstborn sons because they don't inherit anything and they most of the time can't marry. And if you're in that situation, you cause problems. And so the Taliban solved that problem by taking them out of there into Afghanistan to fight for them. So Pakistan wins, the Taliban wins, we lose. So there's your reality. If you were like, no, why would Pakistan do that? They're our ally. That's why they would do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Little hiccup there, but uh so you brought up an article you wanted to talk about, but
Mm-hmm.
also I wanted to actually talk about policy stuff because it's important to this whole thing because I mean the big thing going is he's an unabashed democratic socialist. And
Mm-hmm.
of course I've given my view that socialism never works because it has to at some point be forced. So there is no democratic to democratic socialist except for that first vote that gets it into the system.
Well,
And
actually, yeah, get ready to pull that up because so what the reason I wanted to talk about this article that I recently came across, even though it's from March, so it's months old, but I think it's important, very important, to not just be old men yelling at clouds, but also we don't want to fall into the trap of what we're criticizing, okay? Because this mentality of patronage and plunder is based on um, regressive, primitive otherism, tribalism of those people bad, us good. And I think we're falling into that trap. And there's an element of that with the policies you're talking about that Mamdani is advocating. All right, so this is from American Reformer, which is a conservative Christian think tank. And the title of the article is "Red Pills Without Roots." And I'm going to read a little bit from each section of this. And right off the bat, that his first few sentences set up what you're talking about. Okay. And again, he's coming at it from a capital C conservative perspective, but we've all kind of become fellow travelers on this side because of the meme of the guy sprinting to the left and saying, "When did you become a part of the radical right?" to the guy who was standing in the middle, right? All right. So I've advocated before that I think that uh, this strange coalition of MAGA and Maha could revive federalism, but we first have to define what our shared values are so that we can espouse something positive, not just say that's bad. Okay. And I love the framing here in the first few sentences. The greatest internal threat to genuine conservatism stems from modern ideological impulses that seek to reduce all human activity to simple precepts meant to explain the entirety of human existence. So stop right there because that first sentence says a lot. And he goes into it to criticize the right from the right of saying, yeah, look, I've pointed to this or that and saying, this is where things went wrong, but it's not just that. That is an example of where we have gone wrong. And this hyperfixation on a thing to say that's bad. And you see that in policy, especially in policy from people who come from a Marxist background, which is all about power dynamics and hierarchy. And so all we're doing is inverting the hierarchy so that we're on top now. And you have a specific example of this.
Yes. So one of his proposed uh, policies is uh, government-owned grocery stores. And we're going to bring down prices for these places because it's government owned. And I'm sorry, all you have to do is go to the DMV to see how that's going to go wrong. But
Yeah.
uh, one of the things I was thinking about with that is how are you going to bring down prices? Because if it's government owned and it's efficient, all you can bring down is the profit margin, right? If that's what if you're getting rid of the fat cats that are making a profit, you can get rid of the profit margin. Well, this is from what can be a biased source if you ask the wrong questions, but gave an honest answer here. Grocery store profit margins, this is Google Gemini, are notably thin and typically falling within the 1 to 3% range.
Mm-hmm.
And factors influencing these low margins. So these are things that make them low. Well, let's start from the bottom. Economic conditions, inflationary pressures, supply chain disruptions, all of that, which we had to deal with as a country.
Mm-hmm.
It's what set a lot of this as part of the public conversation here recently. Perishables and waste. Dealing with perishable goods and potential waste can further erode profit margins. We have our local brand here in Texas is HEB, and they're very particular about what produce they have and keep out there. And they
Mm-hmm.
throw a lot of stuff away
Mm-hmm.
because just a little bit of wilt or a little bit of brown or a little bit of anything, and it's no longer making the cut.
Well, HEB is a good example of this thin profit margin because the reason they became very profitable and very successful isn't the grocery. It's because they started uh pretty early on. I think even before some of the other big national grocery chains started this, is when HEB buys a plot of land to put in a grocery store, they buy a big chunk of it because then all those little stores that want to move in and take advantage of the foot traffic of a grocery store, their landlord is HEB.
I did not know that, but good to know. Okay, so next one, cost of goods sold. So inventory represents a large portion of the grocery store's expensive, often between 70-80% of the revenue. Negotiating favorable deals with suppliers is crucial for managing these costs. Keep that one in mind. Put a pin in that
Mm-hmm.
one. Uh, High operating costs, rent, mortgage, insurance, utilities, equipment leases, and all of these other things. So you can just look at the building and say, this thing is expensive to run, right? And now you add staff, you add the employees, the management, you add accounting, admins, you add all of those things into it, plus the utilities, which fluctuate, by the way. The utilities fluctuate depending on what the nature of the the grid and all of that is in. And then here's the one that keeps it down the most: competition. Intense
Hmm.
competition with the grocery industry pushes prices down, leading to lower profit margins. Okay, so competition, this is the one that cracks me up, and it's the low-hanging fruit here. That's why I ended with it, because that's capitalism. That's not
Hmm.
socialism. Capitalism is one of the major drivers keeping this down. If I can go in and just charge whatever I want because I have no competition, those prices are going up and up and up and up and up. That's why the
Yeah.
one failing of complete free markets is we have a stopgap against monopolies, right?
I mean, me as an example, just within from where I'm sitting, about equidistant from me, there's a Walmart, an Aldi, a Kroger, a Sprouts, and a Target.
Hmm.
Five large grocery chains, all within about 5 minutes of me from where I'm sitting right now.
Yeah, and I use an app on my phone which gives you all of the flyers, the sales from
Hmm.
all of the competing stores around me. And if you'll look at those carefully over a period of time, you'll notice they never have the same sales at the same time
Hmm.
because they don't want to compete sale for sale. They want to catch you on that time the other place is not selling it. So that way all of the traffic goes for that particular item their way, but they will sell something else. So that way you'll go to this one for this, but you'll still come to my store for this other thing. And I don't know how you would hope there's not collusion there, that it's just smart people doing smart things, but I don't know, it's always pretty good. So okay, so now we got a 1 to 3% range. 1 to 3% off your groceries isn't helping anybody. Right? So, oh, all these people are too poor. They can't afford groceries, so state-owned grocery stores, we're going to drive the prices down. Well, it's got to be more than 1 to 3%. So let's look at these other variables to see where can I drive prices down. Economic conditions, nothing you can do about that, right? That's going to be ebbing and flowing based on everything else going on. The only thing you could say is he's going to do other things in the city that drive down prices, but uh, the mayor doesn't have that much control. I'm sorry. Perishables and waste. Okay, keep stuff longer. Put that sell by date a little bit further out. That could help, right? Is that great for everybody? I think they overdo it right now, but there's also federal regulations and state regulations they have to follow. And so, what's the margin there? How far can you push that out? How ugly of vegetables can you put out? I mean, does it start to get shady with washing your vegetables? All of these things that go with that uh, I guess that variable there. So there's one you could probably get a little bit of squeeze, a juice from the squeeze. Cost of goods sold. Well, I mean, you can't raise the prices because it's capped, right? You're trying to save everybody money. So we can't increase that. High operating costs. Do do we have a way to, I guess the government owns the building, so there's no rent or mortgage on it? I mean, do you think they're going to think that far ahead? Oh, cost of goods sold. The one I wanted that said put a pin in is negotiating favorable deals with suppliers. Okay, so the reason I wanted to put a pin in that one was because what did I say at the beginning of this conversation? At some point, socialism always becomes forced.
Hmm.
The only way to negotiate favorable deals and get a better deal than the capitalist system is to force them to lower their prices.
Well, Walmart says we'll give you, you know, X amount of dollars for Y amount of goods, and Tyson or Dole or whoever can come back and say, well, Target is offering me this,
Hmm.
right? Well, if it's just the government, they come in and say, here's the deal. You're going, and it's not even a take it or leave it, because oftentimes with these deals, it's a you're going to take it.
But even still, that's limited because how many New York City entities are there that produce the goods that are going to be sold
Mm-hmm.
in those stores?
Mm-hmm.
Very close to zero. And this is one of the differences between urban and rural areas as far as their voting patterns, is rural areas understand the means to the product, where typically urban places see the means of production. The raw material versus the production. So Detroit makes the cars. They used to, anyways.
Hmm.
Detroit makes the cars, but they don't make the steel. They don't mine the ore. They don't do any of that. They don't come up with the leather. They have all of that shipped in, and then they produce something out of it.
If you want a classic explainer of the complexity of the economic system, there's a very old but still very relevant economic essay called I Pencil, and it was about just how making a simple pencil requires a vast array of different people doing different things.
Okay, so now that I've gone back to cost of goods, high operating costs. Does the city own the building? Okay, that would reduce prices, right? Maybe, because there's also maintenance and all of those things that go along with it. Insurance isn't going to change. Utilities aren't going to change unless you force the city to pay for all the utilities from the supply. Equipment leases, staff salaries. Okay, here's the big one. Here's a big one because he's also proposing a $30 minimum wage for New
Hmm.
York. So that staff salary becomes a bigger chunk. So we've already got a 1 to 3% range. We might have got some juice from these other places,
And
but now you
okay,
have to pay these
assume
people more.
yeah. So you're but and it's the government paying. If it's a government grocery store, then that is adding to the city's budget while taking away from the budget. Because let's assume then there's no rent or mortgage because
Well,
the
now you're
city
getting to the
owns the
final
building.
point, though. You're ahead to the final point.
Okay,
I'm talking
so
about
you're
just operating the
yeah.
thing itself,
So
because
you're losing tax revenue because now you own this building and you are presumably selling the groceries at cost. So there's no tax revenue there, but there is more tax outlay because you're paying these people and you're buying the groceries for people to come in and buy at cost. How's that going to work out?
so you just went to the final point is the fact of the matter is it doesn't work unless you take from the city budget itself to subsidize everything, which means every taxpayer, regardless of whether they benefit from this or not, is paying for it.
Hmm.
That's why it's socialist, because it is taking from one to benefit another. And so if costs are down, we know they have to be artificially down. And so you are taking from one area and artificially deflating costs in another using that money for subsidy. And that's when people start to have problems with it. And then it has to be forced.
And it doesn't take that much thought or investigation to find out that this policy proposal is nonsense, that it cannot work. It will not work. It has not worked. It has been tried in the past. Okay. Yeah, I brought up the Khrushchev visiting a grocery store and thinking he was being set up, and then being told, "No, this is just a normal grocery store. We didn't make this just for you, just for PR, just for a photo op. This is just how it works here, because in the Soviet Union, that's not how it works. Is you better hurry up and get in line to get your bread ration, or there's no bread."
Hmm.
Okay. But the point being, Mamdani and the people he's talking to and the people supporting him, they don't care because the actual outcome of the policy isn't what matters. What matters is I'm mad. I'm being hurt. I feel like I'm being oppressed. Maybe I am actually being oppressed. I don't know. But the point is, it's that person's fault and I want them punished. It is plunder and patronage. I want those people punished because I'm mad at my situation in life. And the reason I brought up this American Reformer article is because he makes the John Harris, the author, makes the point that we'd better be careful because we the anti-radical left coalition in general, that we are really flirting with that same ideology. And so let me go back to it to make the point. So starting with the crisis of the modern right is his first section here. And like I said, I love that first sentence. And then he goes into where the conservative movement went astray. And I think that is also important, even if you are not conservative, because it it goes to how the conservative movement is perceived. As he mentions, you know, uh, in the post-war era, the conservative establishment increasingly compromised with liberal ideology to the point that before Trump, national politics had essentially become a choice between competing liberal visions. This dynamic gave rise to sayings like, there's not a dime's worth of difference between a Republican and a Democrat, and as Michael Malice has said, I'm sure you've heard, conservatism is just liberalism driving the speed limit.
Hmm.
And both of them are headed towards a cliff. Um, back to John Harris's article. Over time, genuine conservatives were steadily replaced by liberals, and tradition gave way to ideology, leaving today's right to question what, if anything, they are truly conserving, as so-called conservatives dutifully enshrine the left's egalitarianism from a decade ago. Same-sex marriage, the civil rights regime, and women's liberation are now framed as conservative achievements, co-opted, we are told, by social justice operatives. Next section, a generation in turmoil. And I think this is primarily focused on Zoomers, but I think this also applies to most, especially younger millennials. I think, as I've said before, we're quite kind of in that weird border area of young Gen Xers and old millennials, so we don't quite fit in either block. So I think that's kind of how we're on the outside looking in for both of these generations. Um, a generation in turmoil. Of course, the shift did not begin in 2020. For the past decade, the post-liberal left had been making significant strides, weaponizing the very things ordinary, decent Americans held dear, their heritage, sacred institutions, and hard-earned success against them. Pause for editorialization. For the past decade, he says, as you've brought up, what happened in 2010 to 2012 with the language of corporate media
Yeah,
and how
the
that was being
words,
pushed.
the words that appeared and
Mm-hmm.
skyrocketed.
Into this chaotic fray, back to the article, entered a younger generation of right wingers who clearly recognized their enemies but carried their own burdens. They resembled the generation from Exodus 1, those who did not remember Joseph and found themselves trapped in a nightmare not of their own making. Many came from unstable homes, raised by divorced parents, and moved frequently. In school, they were told they bore the stain of America's sins if they were white, male, or Christian. Unlike their fathers, who found belonging in once thriving institutions like the Boy Scouts, sports teams, and hunting clubs, they sought solace elsewhere, online through video games and chat forums where others in similar circumstances offered them a sense of camaraderie. I want to pause there because I think that that phrase is important, a sense of camaraderie. See, because I've kind of referenced this before in other circumstances. This is where we're a little weird when it comes to younger millennials and Zoomers because we grew up with the same thing. We grew up, you know, playing video games, except we would play Madden and then we would go outside and actually throw the ball around.
Hmm. Well, not only that, it is different because if we played Madden, it was two people next to each other with
Mm-hmm.
controller one and controller two.
Yep.
It wasn't online with somebody you've never heard of across the country with a handle that is, Nut Hugger 537 or something, you know?
Exactly. So Same thing. I've used the example before of oh my gosh, the violence in cartoons, and that The Simpsons,
Have you seen Ren and
parodies with
Stimpy?
Itchy and Scratchy. Right.
Yeah.
It's yeah, we watched. I've said before, when we were in elementary school, you came in, you sat down in the hallway, and there was a TV sitting there showing Looney Tunes while we waited for the bell to ring for everyone to go to their homeroom class. Yeah, except we also had teachers and administrators that would actually discipline us, and then you would get disciplined again at home if you got in trouble at school.
Hmm.
So the zaniness, the quote unquote violence of the cartoons was kept in check by by proper discipline that didn't let us get out of hand.
Well, and this might be a whole episode on its own because I'm gonna have to dig further and see if there's literature on this. But a thought it just occurred to me on that is we had Looney Tunes, we had Tom and Jerry, later Ren and Stimpy and all of those that were obviously very violent, very a lot of innuendo in there and everything, but they're also decidedly not real
Hmm.
because it's a rabbit and a duck and Elmer
Hmm.
Fudd, or because it's the cat and the mouse, and sometimes the bulldog comes in. It was obviously a caricature of this zany behavior. Well, nowadays, everything is so realistic, especially in the video games, that I wonder if that barrier actually has something to do with it. The fact that it's so unrealistic that it becomes what it was, just a cartoon.
And there isn't the constraining influence of authority figures, and that's so leads me right back into John Harris's article here. They, the generation in turmoil, watched as the authority figures their parents had taught them to respect, teachers, pastors, community leaders, surrendered to the woke mob at every turn. They had no memory of stable households, functional communities, or the post 9/11 era of American unity. They only felt the absence of those things, as if something vital had been taken from them. Desperate for answers, they questioned why they couldn't afford a home, secure a good job, or earn respect. In their search for explanations, they pointed to forces beyond their control: boomers, the deep state, the Jews, and others they believed had robbed them of the future they were promised. These are obviously generalizations, but they must be understood in order to understand what is happening now. And what is happening now, the point I'm getting at is that right there is exactly the foundation that leads to people like Mamdani, that leads to people like this Omar Fatah, the mayoral candidate in Minneapolis, who's this radical socialist Somali guy. They don't understand. They know something is wrong. The supporters of these people know something is wrong, but they have fixated on a simplistic answer that simply says it's those people. And now that I've got you good and mad and I've got you pointed at that target, let's go get them.
Hmm. Well, and it's also in the case of the Democratic Socialists, it's an easy target because they always use the word billionaires. How many people in the audience has actually met a billionaire?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're anywhere close to middle class, assets and everything can end up to we could call it a millionaire if everything
Mm-hmm.
was liquidated. But how many of the people in the audience has actually met a multimillionaire?
Yeah.
Probably the grand minority. I've met a multimillionaire because I train professional athletes, and sometimes I go to special events where the people who fund the things that make them money are there. And it's an abstraction that nobody can identify with, so it's an easy demon. It's like saying, the Yeti is going to eat your children, so we need to kill all Yetis. Okay,
Yep. Um, back to Harris and his article here, and the next section is red pills with no anchor. On the political right, a significant divide began to emerge. Establishment liberals blamed the post-liberal woke left, while a growing faction rejected liberalism altogether. Today, defenders of the liberal order labeled these dissenters the woke right, as both the left and an increasing number of young conservatives reject neutralist liberalism. As many predicted, this ideological break has led to a scattered and often disjointed understanding of the right's decline. Without a comprehensive framework to interpret historical developments, many anti liberal dissidents piece together explanations in isolation. Did things go wrong in 2015 with the acceptance of so-called gay marriage, or was it the Hart-Celler Act? Was the real turning point the outcome of the American Civil War or World War II? Or does every problem ultimately trace back to Jewish influence or universal suffrage? Depending on which rabbit hole one goes down, there are countless justifications for each position, fueled by an endless stream of online content. With no trusted institutions to guide them, many rely on their instincts and the internet voices they've chosen to trust. And I'm going to pause there and actually, do you have that X thread that I sent you? I actually think this is an important place to bring this up.
The Chat
Because
GPT one.
yeah, I think these large language model AI is accelerating this because as he put it, these rabbit holes, these internet voices have become so much easier to find and so much easier to cater to what you want to hear.
Okay, so the poster is Dr. Sakata. Did I pronounce that right? You know more Japanese than I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in 2025, I've seen 12 people hospitalized after losing touch with reality because of AI. Online, I'm seeing the same pattern. Here's what AI psychosis looks like and why it's spreading fast. And I'm going to blow this picture up here. You want to read that out here?
So this is from a Reddit post about uh, Chat GPT,
And I'm
and the
assuming
title.
this is from the spouse.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The title is Chat GPT induced psychosis. My partner has been working with Chat GPT chats to create what he believes is the world's first truly recursive AI that gives him the answers to the universe. He says with conviction that he is a superior human now and is growing at an insanely rapid pace. I've read his chats. AI isn't doing anything special or recursive, but it is talking to him as if he is the next Messiah. He says if I don't use it, he thinks it is likely he will leave me in the future. We have been together for 7 years and own a home together. This is so out of left field. I have boundaries and he can't make me do anything, but this is quite traumatizing in general. I can't disagree with him without a blow up. Where do I go from here? Where indeed? Now I would point out that to that person, and then the Dr. Sakata goes on. There's a number more where he defines what psychosis is, technically speaking,
A
and then
break from
how,
shared reality is how he
yeah,
defines it.
a break from shared reality, and then how this AI bubble feedback loop can induce this. And so that was to the original poster. Again, as we've kind of ranted about, we talk about mental health. We use the term mental health much more openly now in society, but we don't actually mean it because mental health, much like physical health, requires work. And just like in physical health, most people don't actually want to be coached. They just want affirmation of what they're already doing or want to do.
Yeah,
When it comes to
I'm going to
mental
bring this
health, most
back
people
up.
just want affirmation.
Yeah, I'm going to bring this back up because it's right as on with what you said. So in what is this post three, he says this is how your brain works, and he's got a flow chart basically here: predict, check reality, then update belief. And psychosis happens when the update step fails, which is exactly true, right? Because people who are out of touch with reality, whether it's psychosis or some other mental health version of that. They'll see reality, but then they'll be like, well, it must be that's wrong.
Hmm.
I mean, you see that talking to people all the time. This is so language abstracts things to a degree, so you get a lot more examples of it. Language learning models probably exacerbate that, right? To your point. But how many times has someone asked you a question and you answered that question, and then they respond in a way that they must have already made up their mind how you were going to answer it because it wasn't what you said.
And that was what I was getting at with that original post that he used from Reddit of the person saying this came out of left field. Well, actually, no, it almost certainly did not. You just didn't see, didn't understand, or didn't want to to recognize the warning signs.
Hmm. Well,
The
and it can be left field is relative because if it happened over a
Mhm.
course of days and you've been together for 7 years, that feels like it was all
Well,
of a sudden.
true, but
Okay, so I'm going to go on to his next one
yes.
uh, because it's to the point you made a couple minutes ago, meaning they predict the next word based on the last. So long language learning models are auto-regressive. They predict the next word based on the last ones. They lock in on whatever you give them. So he uses the same model, but instead of prediction, reality, update, it's prediction, further double down on prediction, triple down on prediction. You're
Hmm.
chosen. You're definitely chosen. You're the most chosen person ever. AI equals hallucinatory mirror. That's,
I love that framing. Yeah, that's a
yeah.
great way to put it. Um, and and my concern. So you've talked about psychopathy
Hmm.
and how there is a spectrum of psychopathy, and so on the lower end, that can be a good thing in certain avenues. I've used my own, you know, pain management doctor as an example of I sitting on an ice pack right now because my physical therapist is the same way. Is you know if I'm training you, one of the first things I'm going to tell you is I hate the phrase no pain, no gain. I don't want you to be in pain. Okay. Pain is your body saying something's wrong. However, as we say, there is an exception to almost every rule. If you have a chronic condition or if you are recovering from an injury, you're probably going to have to be put into pain in order to get better. What makes my physical therapist so good is she's very good at putting me in pain, but then recognizing, so as you've said, in strength and conditioning, I want to make you appropriately uncomfortable. Well, she makes me appropriately in pain and then recognizes, all right, you've had enough. Like yesterday, we didn't do that much. And
Hmm.
we did some dry needling with electronic stimulation. And then we did two exercises. And then I said, okay, what's next? And she's like, no, you've had enough. You need a
Hmm.
rest and recover. Okay. So she could have kept pushing. She could have put me in more pain, but she recognized, no, no, you've had enough. Now you push that psychopathy farther, and it's going to be, yeah, let's do another one because I get off on seeing you in pain. The point I'm making here is if you are already inclined, if you're already somewhere on the spectrum for a psychotic break, my worry is that something like these large language models are going to make it easier, which means you don't have to be as far along the spectrum as you would have otherwise, if that makes sense. So if you have say there's a you could put a scale from 0 to 10 on someone who is susceptible to a psychotic break. Well, before you would have to be like a 7 or 8 to be pushed over the edge into a psychotic break. Okay, because you would have to have something real happen to you. Well, now maybe you can be a 1, and it just takes some time of this feedback loop, this hallucinatory mirror, as Dr. Sakata put it, and now you can get there. A lot easier.
Well, and we can bring in the old master and his emissary, Ian McGilchrist, where we talk about the predictive model part of the brain
Hmm.
versus the inputs model part of the brain. If we lean away from the inputs part of the brain, which is typically on the right side, right hemisphere, and we shift more to a left brain type situation where it's really great at predicting things. Both are very useful. I mean, we've made these models in our head for a reason because it shortcuts us through life. If we were still babies, seeing things like babies, we would still be going and we would be dead because we never would have learned to feed ourselves or anything
Yeah.
like that. But at the same time, we have a lot of things in society that are shifting us even more to the left. And this is McGilchrist's point is things like pop music, predictable beats, things that get you into I mean, you can put any lyrics into most pop songs and it will work because it's a formula. It works. It gets the part of the brain that loves comfort. Another one that I brought up just a second ago, people predict what you're going to say before you say it, which is useful sometimes in a discussion because you can't just be having new information with everything you hear, or else your brain wouldn't be able to respond and conversations would be very awkward. But at the same time, if it's so far shifted that you don't even hear the response or register the response, you heard it, but you didn't register it, and you continue the discussion, we see this in political arguments. Watch two pundits from the right and the left arguing with each other. Are they actually arguing each other's points? Or are
Hmm.
they talking to each other as straw men? We have a word for it, straw man arguments. I predicted you're going to be this way, so I'm going to argue with that person.
Well, this leads me right back into the next section I wanted to read from Harris's article, because way back we made this point when Ted Cruz and Bernie Sanders had their debate on CNN, and the exact same debate, and yet depending on which side of the internet you went to, it was Cruz destroys Sanders with this. Sanders embarrasses Cruz. If you're on the left, it's like it it was the same debate. Y'all just saw what you wanted to saw. You would just were in your own confirmation bias. And that is the concern of these bubbles, is that what Dr. Sakata was talking about with this AI large language model chat induced psychosis, all that's doing is taking this same road that we're on and straightening it out and shortening it so you get there quicker.
Hmm.
Okay. Because if you are in one of these ideological bubbles, you're doing the exact same thing. The only thing the large language model does is, as he put it, in that thread, it makes it quicker because it is more targeted to you personally. Okay, so this section of the article is the only poll left. In a clever attempt to counter liberal framing, the online right began using its own metrics of valuation. Rather than adopting the labels their opponents used against them, racist, misogynist, homophobe, they started using their own language of critique, calling their enemies effeminate, cringe, and gay. Likewise, instead of upholding liberal virtues like diversity and equality, they elevated terms like base, trad, and chad. While this was largely internet slang, at its core, it reflected a rejection of egalitarianism in favor of hierarchy and order. Of course, some people grasp these concepts more deeply than others, which is to be expected. But one quickly notices that these competing standards often exist only in relation to the left's destructive standards. Something is deemed based simply because it transgresses woke egalitarianism, regardless of whether it upholds anything truly positive. Take Andrew Tate, for example. To many, his views on women are based. He is a Chad. His lifestyle is trad. Yet his outlook blatantly contradicts the Christian norms that once defined the West.
Well, he is Muslim, so
We're about to get there. Tate
okay.
recognizes that men and women are different, but his conclusions, glorifying a world of money, sports cars, and exploitation, fail to offer a meaningful alternative to the liberal order. His philosophy thrives in opposition to liberalism, but does little to establish a coherent vision of what should replace it. Adolescent boys may find his persona appealing, but the issue for conservatives is not just that his worldview conflicts with their traditions. It is that his vision is inseparable from the very liberal order he claims to reject. It both feeds on that order and defines itself against it merely because that is the prevailing system. This pattern repeats across various ideologies vying for influence on the right. To that point, to expound on that, to make it more blatant, how is what Andrew Tate is espousing any different from what the Mongols did? From what, to your point, you brought up the fact that he's a Muslim, from what the conquering Muslims did through the territories that they did. Heck, you can get it now. There are clips that are shared of Muslim clerics talking about why it's okay to do what they're doing to Western white women and girls, because through the hadiths, concubinage is your right. Concubinage being a very polite way to say sex slaves.
Hmm.
Go look up what happened to the Yazidis under ISIS. It's still happening. A lot of them are still being held captive. So it's not any different. It's just he's opposed to the people who are currently culturally and sometimes politically in charge. There's no, as John Harris put it here, there's no the what is being constructed to be contrary to that current hierarchy, or that current order of things, is simply opposition. It is not anything positive in its own right. That's dangerous. That's why we started out talking about Mamdani and his third world, Marxist hierarchy of power ideology, because we on the anti-woke side are doing the same thing. You and I, and hopefully those of you listening here, that we're not doing that. We're trying to claw away from that. But in order to do so, we've got to create a positive vision that establishes why, not just those things are wrong because they're hurting you.
Hmm.
Those things are wrong because they're making your life more difficult. No, those things are objectively wrong based on these philosophical tenets.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the divide now, and I've complained many times that people are misusing the word liberal uh, when they uh, when they describe the left, because it's not liberal, it's progressivism, right? And progress isn't always good. And what is the role? Because some of the pundits that say it's not the full answer. I'm like, what is even the question that you're trying to answer with that? And I'm like, in the current situation, I'm almost to the point where I'm like, maybe because the left has sprinted so far that way, and now we've got the woke right sprinting the opposite direction. What if the role of the liberal is the mediator? Because progressivism to a point becomes authoritarian. Conservatism to a point becomes authoritarian. What if the liberal is the hub in the middle that says, okay, these values you cherish as a conservative are beneficial, but here's your line, because freedom is the number one value of the United States. Progressives, okay, you've got some good points when it comes to X, Y, Z, but here's the line. I mean, what's wrong with that? The problem is it doesn't make for good politics because you have to have an A versus B choice. But as far as punditry, as far as uh, I don't know. I don't know how that fits into the system, but I think ideologically that's where we've gotten.
Well, that leads me to his conclusion, um, the path ahead. And I'm just going to read the first couple of paragraphs here. Um, as I argue in my book, political alignment cannot be measured along a single axis of right and left. In the Anglo American tradition, two distinct poles have historically shaped political thought. One driven by a progressive egalitarian impulse that often fuels revolutionary movements, and the other rooted in a deep respect for hierarchy and civil order, often expressed through populist resistance to change. The former seeks to remake America or uphold an abstract, hollowed out version of its defining proposition of equality, while the latter strives to preserve the conditions that allow Americans to fulfill their duties to God, honor their ancestors, and pass down their unique heritage. Conservatives should and still must maintain a unique, positive vision. One should not be considered to the right of those who faithfully promote and protect traditional America simply because they transgress against the left. Were Bavarian Catholics who opposed Hitler positioned to his right or left? Were traditional Southerners who opposed fascism to the right or left of fascists? These are questions worth pondering because the answers help us understand what a truly conservative posture is. And to his point there, the reason he makes those points, what he's saying is the right where they were politically didn't matter because they were opposing something foundationally abhorrent. Is like what your particular policy preferences are irrelevant when people are being rounded up and thrown into camps.
Yeah.
What your thoughts on tariffs are irrelevant when you are opposing chattel slavery and treating human beings as property. In other words, it wasn't just that, oh, they were opposed, so they're on our side. It's no, they are opposed to something that is foundationally, objectively anti-human. And this is where you brought up Vivek Ramaswamy earlier when we were talking about Mamdani. And this is where I have a problem with him, but I have a problem with his phrasing. And this isn't new. Earlier in this article, John Harris references the term the propositional nation. And what he means by that is the idea that America is an idea.
Mm.
I don't like that because, hey, I have an idea, you know, let's go fishing. Okay, well that's a good idea. Let's do that. That's an idea. I understand what people mean when they say America is an idea or America was founded on an idea. I don't like the term because what America was founded on is something much stronger than an idea. And the term I've come up with is creed. We are a creedal nation. Okay. Well, what is our creed? And this also gets to the first part of Harris's Red Pills Without Roots essay, which was the failing of conservatism to conserve because it failed to teach what we were conserving and why we should conserve it. Okay. We are a creedal nation, and here is our creed. This is from the National Archives. Note the following text is a transcription of the stone engraving of the parchment Declaration of Independence, the document on display in the rotunda at the National Archives Museum. The spelling and punctuation reflects the original. Point being, this is the original document. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That any form of government becomes that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Go on and read the whole thing, because I think it's also important that we just kind of read the first part there and don't go into these very long. You see this list here of these are the abuses of the king and his government that have happened over several decades that have led us to this point. The point being, the founders set out in paper and put their signatures to it, and many of them, most of them, suffered severely for it, but they were willing to do so not just because what he's doing is bad. That is one of the revisions of smearing the founding is, oh, these were just wealthy white men who were mad because the king was imposing upon their profits. No, no, it wasn't just that guy bad. It was, no, that person is violating these fundamental tenets of humanity that are transcendent of temporal politics. However, you think we get here, nature or nature's God, whatever your thought on how we got here, the fact is we human beings are different. And thus we should be treated and treat each other differently than mere animals, which are might makes right. That is our fundamental creed. Now, how we affect that, that is what we should be debating. But the reason we are where we are is because we have allowed too many people from both inside and outside to fundamentally reject that creed. And they call themselves progressive, but as I've said, no, it's simply regressive, because it is going back to a very tribal mentality, a very pre-Enlightenment, pre-Renaissance era when it was, well, yeah, of course I can, as I've said, our the reason the idea of race is so modern is because we in the West had to come up with a justification to do something we inherently knew was wrong. You didn't need to justify it in the past. The Romans had no reason to create some kind of convoluted philosophy to justify the fact that approximately 1/3 of their empire were slaves. That's just the way it was. Yeah, of course you're slaves because we conquered you. It is what it is.
Yeah, we got to kind of close this as we've almost gone 2 hours here, I think. But I want to close it with steel manning the democratic socialist argument based on what you just said,
Mm.
because it is one of their arguments. I think I've heard Cornel West say this, but don't quote me on that. I think he's the most likely source to get this from because he's probably the smartest democratic socialist out there. But they use he would use the phrase all men are created equal. Therefore, any inequity is due to systemic injustices.
Mhm.
If we are all created equal, then any unequal result is due to the system.
And this is why um, Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Haidt has so much changed my political thinking from, my youthful political nerdery of, well, everyone should be a conservative, and if you just understood, you would change your mind. No, because one, we're different people, we think differently, but two, to Haidt and Peterson's points that they've been making for a decade or more now is we need each other. That is why I liked John Harris coming from the conservative Christian standpoint, and the primary focus of his essay was how we on the conservative Christian side can retake that brand and make it something truly positive and worthwhile. But we also need to understand that there's this other pole, and that push and pull, that yin and yang, is important so that neither one of us go too far, so that neither one of us forget where we actually come from and what we're trying to achieve.
Looking for a source here, but I think it was Cult 45. So here's a two to finish this out. Here's a 2A argument for the Democratic Socialist. Uh, you should support both because believe it was Cult 45. One of their original slogans was God made some men big, some men small, but the Colt 45 made them all equal.
That was a popular saying in the latter half of the 1800s, was that God created men, but Henry Colt made them equal.
Hmm. Just to close this out, I just wanted to steel man that argument just because of the wording in because realistically, if we look at human beings as individuals, which I'm an individualist, we are not all equal. Some are born big, some are born small, tall, short, smart, dumb, uh, clumsy, coordinated, open-minded, conscientious. We're all over the place. The Constitution to me was we are all equal under the law, and I kind of
Exactly.
wish they would have said those words.
That was one of, again, back to the failings of my own side, the conservative Christian side, is the failure to adequately push back against the leftist idea that equal means same. No, it doesn't. Equal does
And
not mean same.
and life being taken from others, right? Because your life is still your responsibility.
Hmm.
Liberty, your liberty being taken from others, including the government. Pursuit of happiness, other people getting in the way of your pursuit of happiness. Obviously they're writing a concise document, but that's what it means. If I'm on a desert island, the whole argument of if you're on a desert island, you still have the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. The sun can still kill me
Hmm.
if I don't make shelter.
Hmm.
I can still dehydrate if I don't find water.
Hmm.
But someone else coming along can try to take that from me, and I have the right to protect my life. If I found water and they're trying to take it from me, I have the right to protect my life. And they have the right to try to take it. Under the government, since we all have to live together, that's when the government stands in, according to that document, to prevent that person from coming and killing me to take my thing.
Exactly. The what makes the American creed so radical, so revolutionary, so different at the time of its founding was what it said right there. Governments are instituted among men to protect these rights, not to give these rights. These rights already exist.
Hmm. Again, swing your fist as long as it doesn't hit anybody in the nose or any part of their body, I guess.
Principles principles still the same. All right. Well, we have yelled at the clouds enough for today. No idea what we're going to be yelling at the clouds about next time. We'll see if there's any comments and what thoughts we have.
Well, do we have examples? Because we said maybe our Wheel of Time
Oh,
discussions
that's right. We were
will
going to we were going to I mentioned I want to segue this to how does this work practically speaking, using a story as an example, so maybe we can separate it from the emotions of the real life, because there's an example of this in the Wheel of Time series in the Two Rivers, which
hmm
starts to get flooded with refugees fleeing the war-torn areas around it, and they're like, how do we do this? How do we let these people live with us without losing our distinct character?
All right. And also we could probably parse out some other authoritarian regimes versus, more, I guess, citizen-friendly regimes out there
Mhm.
in that world. So,
All right. Well, we will ramble about that then, and we will see y'all next time.
all right, later.